My name is Alara Vance, and I am 31 years old. The salt-scented air of Port Blossom, the coastal town where I grew up, still clings to my memories like the persistent morning mist. It was here, in a cedar-shingled house on Lilac Lane, that my grandmother taught me the difference between a house and a home. The house, she said, was just wood and nails and glass. The home was the love and respect you built inside it. After she passed, she left me that house, a legacy valued at nearly $1 million. I thought it would be my sanctuary. Instead, it became the silent witness to a betrayal that reshaped my life. It all came down to a single, carelessly ended phone call from my father. "She's always been a weight on us," he'd said to my mother, his voice traveling across an ocean, unaware I was listening. They were enjoying the Tuscan sun on my money, while casually planning how to take the last precious thing I had. In that moment, the foundation of my world didn't just crack, it crumbled. And from the rubble, I began to build something new. When they returned, suntanned and smiling, bearing gifts, their key was a useless piece of metal against a brand new lock. The house was a hollow shell, and my note, left on the cold quartz countertop, was simple. "I hope you feel lighter now. The burden is gone." This is the story of how I learned to build a home within myself, a place no one could ever take from me. Growing up in Port Blossom was to grow up with the rhythm of the tides and the scent of pine and saltwater. Our family, however, lived in a constant state of low tide. My parents, Thomas and Catherine Vance, were perpetually caught in the undertow of financial anxiety. We lived in a cramped duplex on the industrial side of town, far from the charming sea-facing cottages and the quaint downtown where tourists bought saltwater taffy. My father worked long shifts at the fish cannery, his hands permanently stained and smelling of brine, his spirit soured by dreams that had long since dried up. My mother was a checker at the local grocery store, her smiles for customers a mask for the weary lines around her eyes. Love, in our home, was a currency of obligation. Every school trip, every new pair of shoes, every birthday cake was tallied in a silent ledger of their sacrifice, a debt I was expected to repay with quiet compliance and unending gratitude. My grandmother, Annalise, was my northern star. She was the one who taught me to see beyond the gray harbor waters to the endless blue horizon. A widow since her early 30s, she had taken a small inheritance and her love of stories and opened The Crow's Nest, a beloved little bookstore on the wharf that became a Port Blossom institution. Her home on Lilac Lane, nestled amongst whispering pines and wild roses, was my true north. The house wasn't grand, but it was filled with the light that poured in from large, sea-facing windows, the scent of baking bread and old paper, and the immeasurable warmth of her presence. In her sprawling, chaotic garden, we'd spend hours tending to stubborn hydrangeas and delicate poppies. "Life is about knowing what to nurture and what to prune, Alara," she'd tell me, her hands deep in the rich soil. That goes for plants and for people. At my parents' house, I felt like a weed, taking up valuable space. At Grandma Annalise's, I felt like I could bloom. She was the one who encouraged my dream of becoming an architect, a dream my parents dismissed as impractical and arrogant. "An architect? Who do you think you are?" my father scoffed. "People like us work with our hands, not with fancy drawings." But my grandmother saw the meticulous way I built sandcastles, the hours I spent sketching floor plans for imaginary houses. She helped me build a portfolio, apply for scholarships, and secure the loans my parents refused to co-sign. I worked my way through university, bussing tables and shelving books at the campus library, my designs fueled by caffeine and a desperate desire to build a life of my own making. My graduation was a quiet affair. Grandma Annalise was there, her eyes shining with pride, a single, perfect rose in her hand. My parents came, but complained about the traffic and the length of the ceremony. 2 years after I graduated and began my internship at a prestigious firm in Seattle, my northern star went out. Grandma Annalise passed away peacefully in her sleep, a book resting on her chest. The grief was a physical force, knocking the air from my lungs. At the reading of her will, the sterile office of her lawyer felt like a vacuum. My parents were bequeathed a respectable sum, enough to pay off their debts and provide a comfortable cushion. They spent it within a year on a new SUV, a massive television, and a series of ill-advised investments. And then, the lawyer read the final provision. "To my beloved granddaughter, Alara Vance, I leave my home at 145 Lilac Lane and its contents, with my deepest faith that she will understand its true value and continue to fill it with light and love." A stunned silence filled the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face became a thundercloud. The deed was solely in my name. The house, which had appreciated to a value of nearly $750,000, was unequivocally mine. From that day forward, a subtle but significant shift occurred in my parents' language. My house became the family home. My inheritance became the family's good fortune. While I moved back to Port Blossom, transferring to a smaller architectural firm to be closer to what I thought was my anchor, they began their slow, insidious colonization. It started with small things. My father decided my grandmother's beloved, worn armchair was an eyesore and replaced it with a hulking leather recliner that dominated the living room. My mother took down the impressionist prints Annalise had collected and replaced them with generic, mass-produced farmhouse decor. I was paying the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, the utilities. I was funding the repairs and the upkeep from my growing salary. Yet, every decision I made was subject to their veto. When I chose a soft, sea glass green for the guest room, my mother painted over it in a drab beige while I was at work. It was too cold, dear, she'd said, not a hint of apology in her voice. When I suggested they might look for a small apartment of their own, now that they were debt-free, they looked at me as if I'd suggested they move to the moon. But this is our home now, Alara, my mother said, her voice laced with wounded disbelief. A family sticks together. Their definition of family, I was beginning to learn, was a one-way street paved with my resources. 3 years into this tense cohabitation, my parents announced their grand dream, a 2-month tour of Italy and Greece. It's what we've always wanted, my father declared over a Sunday dinner I had cooked in what was supposedly my kitchen. And now, with the house, we can finally do it. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. What do you mean with the house? Well, we can take a little equity out, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. It's just sitting there. You mean, I can take out a loan against my house? The house that's in my name. The words came out sharper than I intended. Don't be so technical, Alara, my mother soothed, placing her hand over mine. It's for the family. Your grandmother would have wanted us to have this joy. I refused to take out a home equity loan, but I buckled under the weight of their disappointment and a lifetime of conditioning. I made the fatal mistake of offering to help. My help quickly escalated, through a series of guilt-laden conversations, into my funding the entire trip, first-class flights, boutique hotels, tour packages, and a generous stipend for spending money. I drained a significant portion of my savings, money I had been setting aside for my own future, my own dreams. All the while, they complained that the hotel in Florence wasn't as charming as the pictures, and that the ferry to Santorini was too crowded. The day they were set to leave, I was working from home when I overheard my mother on the phone with her sister, my Aunt Carol. She was in the kitchen, her voice carrying clearly into the living room where I sat with my laptop. Oh, of course Alara is paying for it, she said with a dismissive little laugh. It's the least she can do, really. We're letting her live here, after all. Letting me live here? In my own house? The house my grandmother had entrusted to me, and me alone? A cold knot formed in my stomach. It was a warning bell, loud and clear, but I silenced it with the desperate hope that this grand gesture would finally be enough, that it would finally earn me the unconditional love and respect I craved. I drove them to the airport, hugged them goodbye, and wished them a wonderful trip. If only I had known that the Real journey was about to be my own. It was a Tuesday in early May, a typically overcast Port Blossom afternoon. My parents had been in Italy for a month, their social media a glossy travelogue of Roman ruins and Venetian canals. I was spending the day at home, finalizing a blueprint for a client, when I noticed a damp spot on the ceiling of the pantry. The upstairs bathroom was directly above it. A leak. I remembered my father had done some handyman work on the shower fittings before they left, a task he'd insisted on doing himself to save me money. I needed to ask him exactly what he had done before I called a plumber. I checked the time difference and dialed his international cell. The connection crackled to life after a few rings. Hello. His voice was faint, tinged with the annoyance of being interrupted. Hi, Dad, it's me. Sorry to bother you, but there's a leak in the pantry ceiling, I think from your shower. Do you remember what kind of sealant you used? A heavy sigh came through the phone. Honestly, Alara? I'm in the middle of Tuscany. It's probably nothing. Just put a bucket under it. Can it wait? The ceiling is starting to sag, I said, my patience fraying. I need to call a plumber, and it would help to know what I'm dealing with. Fine, he grumbled. It was just standard silicone caulk. Your mother and I are about to go on a wine tour. I have to go. Okay. Have fun, I said, trying to sound cheerful. Say hi to Mom. Will do. Talk later. I heard a muffled sound, like the phone being jostled into a pocket. He hadn't disconnected the call. I was about to hang up when I heard his voice again, clearer now, as if he'd pulled the phone back out but was oblivious to the live connection. Who is that on the phone? My mother's voice, bright and carefree. Just Alara, he replied, his tone dripping with disdain. Something else is broken in the house. Of course. My finger froze over the end call button. A strange, morbid curiosity held me captive. What is it this time? She asked, her voice losing its holiday cheer. That house is more trouble than it's worth. Tell me about it, my father agreed. I still can't believe Annalise left it to her. Us, her own son, and she leaves her biggest asset to a child. Well, my mother said, her voice lowering into a conspiratorial tone. We just need to be smart about the next phase. The cold knot in my stomach from weeks ago tightened into a block of ice. She's always been a weight on us, Catherine, my father said, and the words struck me with the force of a physical blow. All those years, the expense, the university she was so set on. Now she has this asset, and she acts like she earned it. Her only real value to us now is that house. Oh wait, that's what I was to him. To them. She's soft, though, my mother mused, and the clinical way she analyzed me was somehow worse than the insult. She's so desperate for our approval. Look how easily she paid for this trip. A little bit of guilt, a few mentions of family, and she folded like a cheap suit. They laughed together. It was a sound I had known my whole life, a sound I had always associated with shared joy. Now it sounded like the chittering of vultures. My hand was trembling, but my mind was suddenly sharp, hyper-focused. I fumbled for my tablet on the coffee table and hit the record button, holding my phone close to its microphone. So, what's the plan when we get back? My father asked. We need to formalize this. Get our names on the deed. That's our retirement, right there. We'll start by talking about how much the upkeep is costing her, my mother plotted. We'll offer to help by taking on some of the burden in exchange for joint tenancy. We'll remind her of her family duty. If she resists, we start talking about how we'll end up in a state-run nursing home. She won't be able to handle the guilt. She'll sign, my father said with absolute confidence. Her weakness has always been wanting us to be proud of her. By the time she's my age, she'll thank us for taking charge. I couldn't breathe. The room was tilting, the blueprints on my desk blurring through a film of tears. And if she puts up a real fight? My mother asked. Then we just stay, he said simply. What's she going to do? Evict her own loving parents? The optics would be terrible. She'd never do it. They went on, their voices a low murmur as they discussed their future plans in my house. They'd take the master suite, of course. They'd convert my office, my creative space, into a television room for him. They'd sell off my grandmother's remaining furniture to make way for their own. I listened for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, until the connection finally, mercifully, broke. I sat in the silence, the recording saved, my heart hammering against my ribs. The house around me, my beautiful sanctuary, suddenly felt alien, a stage set for my own fleecing. Every act of generosity, every concession, every sacrifice I had made in the name of family had been seen as nothing more than a weakness to be exploited. I wasn't their daughter. I was a resource. I wasn't family. I was an obstacle. I was a weight. I looked at the sagging pantry ceiling, a visible symptom of the decay that had been spreading, unseen, through the foundations of my life for years. My grandmother's words came back to me, clear as a bell on a cold day. Life is about knowing what to nurture and what to prune. The tears stopped. A cold, quiet resolve settled over me, as clear and hard as winter ice. I had been nurturing a toxic vine that was slowly choking the life out of me. It was time to prune. The first 24 hours were a crucible of grief and fury. I canceled my appointments and sat in the quiet house, the recorded conversation a damning echo in my mind. I grieved for the parents I thought I had, the family I thought we were. And then, the architect in me took over. Grief was a fog, but a plan was a blueprint. It required logic, precision, and a solid foundation. My grandmother hadn't built her success on emotional whims, and I wouldn't either. My first call was to Eleanor Croft, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney whose guest lecture on property law I had attended in university. I found her number and scheduled a consultation for the next day. I drove to her Seattle office with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, but left with a spine of steel. The legal situation is straightforward, Ms. Vance, Eleanor said, after I'd laid out the facts, omitting the emotional details and focusing on the property title and my financial contributions. The house is titled solely in your name. You have paid all taxes, mortgage, and upkeep. Your parents are, in the eyes of the law, tenants without a lease. You have every right to ask them to leave, and you have every right to sell your property. And their belongings? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. You must give them a reasonable opportunity to retrieve their personal property. Document everything. I would suggest placing their items in a secure storage facility and providing them with the access information. It's the cleanest way to handle it. The word cleanest resonated with me. I wanted this to be a surgical removal, not a messy demolition. My next meeting was with David Chin, a top agent at my old firm in Seattle who specialized in high-value, discreet sales. We met at a quiet cafe far from Port Blossom. I need to sell my house, I said, getting straight to the point. And I need it done in under 6 weeks. No for sale sign, no public open houses. Private showings to pre-qualified buyers only. David's eyebrows shot up. That's a tall order, Alara. To move a property that fast and that quietly, you'll have to be prepared to sell under market value. The house had appreciated since I inherited it, now valued around $920,000. We ran the numbers. An aggressive sale might fetch closer to $875,000. I can live with that, I said, the financial loss a small price to pay for my freedom. The peace of mind is worth more than the extra $50,000. That evening, I returned to the house and began the painstaking process of creating a visual inventory. I walked through every room with my tablet, photographing and cataloging every single item. I created a spreadsheet with 4 columns: Annalise's legacy, items my grandmother left that I would keep forever, Alara's life, my own belongings, parents' property, items they had brought into the house and to be donated. I was ruthlessly fair. A lamp my mother had bought, even if I hated it? Parents' property. The worn armchair my father had discarded? I retrieved it from the attic and put it in their column. I would leave no room for accusations of theft or spite. The logistical planning became my shield against the emotional turmoil. I rented a furnished apartment in a quiet Seattle suburb, signing a 6-month lease. I opened new bank accounts at a credit union they'd never heard of. I bought a new phone and a new laptop. I rented a safety deposit box and filled it with every important document I owned: my passport, birth certificate, the deed to the house, and, most importantly, my grandmother's will. As I worked, the house felt like it was holding its breath. One afternoon, sorting through a box of Annalise's papers I'd never gotten around to, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it in her elegant script. It wasn't a letter, it was a journal entry she had apparently written for me, dated a few months before she died. "My dearest Alara," it began. "I've been watching you, and I see the weight you carry, the constant effort to please your parents. I see it because I carried it myself for many years with your father. There is a hunger in him, a sense that the world owes him something, and it is a hunger that can never be filled. I am leaving you this house not as a gift, but as a tool. It is a foundation. Don't let anyone else build their life upon it at the expense of your own. Your life is your design, my brilliant girl. Build it with strong walls and wide open windows. And never, ever let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own home. You deserve to be the master of your own domain." I sat on the floor of my office, her words a balm on my raw, wounded heart. It was as if she knew this day would come and had left me a final blueprint for my own reconstruction. Her validation was the final piece of reinforcement I needed. David Chin worked miracles. Within a week, he had a handful of potential buyers. The winning offer came from a surgeon and her family relocating for a position at a Seattle hospital. They loved the house's character, the garden, the sea views. They could close in 3 weeks, all cash. The timing was perfect. My parents were due back from Greece in 4. The 2 weeks leading up to the closing were a blur of coordinated action. I hired 2 separate moving companies. One for my things, destined for my new apartment. The other for my parents' belongings, destined for a climate-controlled storage unit in their name, with the first 6 months paid in full. I packed my boxes with a strange sense of detachment, sealing away chapters of my life. I packed their boxes with meticulous care, wrapping my mother's porcelain dolls and my father's fishing trophies as if they were precious to me. The night before the movers came, I walked through the garden one last time. The hydrangeas were beginning to bloom, their colors a mix of brilliant blue and soft purple. I touched a petal, a silent thank you to my grandmother for this final, vital lesson. I wasn't just pruning a toxic relationship, I was clearing the ground to let something new grow. The day of the closing was bright and clear. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. I wore a charcoal gray suit, my professional armor. The The meeting at the title company was a sterile, procedural affair. Sign here, initial there. The buyers, the Thompsons, were kind and effusive about their excitement for the house. "We promise to take good care of the garden," Dr. Thompson said to me with a warm smile. "It's what sold us on the place." "My grandmother would have liked that," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. When it was over, I deposited the cashier's check into my new bank account. The number on the receipt felt abstract, unreal. It wasn't a windfall, it was a severance. I met the movers back at the now empty house on Lilac Lane. The rooms echoed with my footsteps. All the life, all the history, had been packed into boxes and hauled away. It was just a structure again, beautiful and vacant. On the gleaming quartz countertop in the kitchen, I placed a single white envelope. Inside was a key to the storage unit, the access code, the address, and a single sheet of paper with a short, typewritten note. I hesitated for a moment, then walked out the front door, locking it behind me for the last time. I didn't drop the keys through the mail slot. I kept them, a small, cold piece of metal in my palm. A reminder of a door I had closed myself. I got into my car and drove north toward Seattle, toward a life I had yet to design. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The burden was gone. And for the first time, I felt the lightness of being truly, terrifyingly, wonderfully on my own. The first week in my new apartment felt like living in a way station. The space was generic, beige walls, inoffensive furniture, a view of a parking lot, but it was a fortress of anonymity. It was blessedly, peacefully quiet. I spent my days methodically unpacking my own life, arranging my books and my grandmother's cherished teacups on the shelves. Each object placed was an act of reclamation. This was my space. These were my things. No one would move them. No one would replace them. I had arranged for a 3-week leave of absence from my firm, citing a family emergency, a statement that was truer than anyone knew. The days fell into a quiet rhythm. I'd wake early, walk to a nearby park with a cup of coffee, and watch the city come to life. I started sketching again, not for clients, but for myself, dreaming up small, self-sufficient cabins, houses that were integrated with nature, spaces designed for quiet contemplation. I was designing my own sanctuary on paper before I was ready to build it in reality. I checked my old phone only once a day, watching the inevitable storm gather on the horizon. For the first 9 days, there was nothing but silence. Then, on the 10th day, the dam broke. It started with a text at 2:15 p.m. "My father. Key isn't working. Call me." An hour later, a voicemail, his voice tight with irritation. "Alara, where are you? The key won't turn. We're exhausted from the flight. This isn't funny." Another hour. My mother's voice, saccharine with false concern. "Alara, honey, we're getting worried. Please just call us and let us know you're all right. And let us in the house." The messages escalated throughout the evening. Confusion turned to anger, then to demands. They called my office. They called my old friends. By midnight, the final voicemail arrived, my father's voice raw with fury. "We saw the note. We found the key. What the hell have you done, Alara? You had no right. This is our home. We're calling a lawyer in the morning. You have destroyed this family." I listened to each message, my heart a cold, steady drum in my chest. I saved them all to a secure cloud drive and then, with a sense of ceremony, I powered down my old phone for the last time. The next morning, true to his word, they descended upon my firm in Port Blossom. My colleague, Sarah, sent me a text on my new number. "Your parents are here," causing a huge scene in the lobby. "Our boss is handling it. Are you okay?" My boss, Mr. Albright, a stern but fair man, called me an hour later. "Alara," he said, his voice calm. "Your parents were just here. They made some very serious, very public accusations about you stealing and selling their home. I told them you were on a personal leave and that this was a private matter, and then I had security escort them out when they refused to leave." He paused. "I don't need to know the details, but I do need to know if this is going to be an ongoing issue for the firm." I took a deep breath. "Mr. Albright, the house was mine. It was left to me by my grandmother, and the title was solely in my name. I allowed my parents to live there, and I made the decision to sell my own property. I am deeply sorry they brought this to your workplace. I can assure you, it will not happen again from my end." There was a long silence on the line. "I see," he said finally. "Well, the story they're telling and the legal facts appear to be two different things. Take the time you need, Alara. Your job is safe." His quiet belief in me was a lifeline. It was one of the first times an authority figure in my life had trusted my word without question. The next few weeks were a campaign of attempted contact. They found my new email address and sent a long, rambling message that swung wildly between accusations and pleas, painting me as a mentally unstable, vindictive child who had cruelly misunderstood a single, private conversation. They offered their forgiveness if I would just do the right thing and buy them a new house with the proceeds. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. I forwarded it to Eleanor Croft and did not reply. Life began to settle into a new normal. I found a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, who specialized in complex family dynamics. In our weekly sessions, I began to unravel the tangled threads of guilt, obligation, and love that had defined my life. "You're not grieving the parents you lost, Alara," she told me one afternoon. "You're grieving the parents you never had." That single sentence unlocked something deep within me. It was the truth. I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love of two people who were incapable of giving it unconditionally. My great betrayal, in their eyes, was not selling the house. It was that I had finally stopped trying. The confrontation I knew was coming happened on a rainy Thursday in July. I had returned to work, having transferred to my firm's main office in Seattle. My parents, having exhausted all other avenues, had somehow discovered my new address. There was a knock on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and my blood ran cold. It was them. For a moment, I considered not answering. But I knew they wouldn't leave. This had to be faced. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. They looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the sterile hallway of the apartment complex. My mother's face was pale and tear-streaked. My father's was a mask of cold fury. "Can we come in?" my mother asked, her voice a pathetic whisper. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We can talk in the lobby." In the impersonal, oversized lobby, we sat on a stiff leather couch, a glass coffee table between us like a negotiation table. "How could you do this to us, Alara?" my mother began, the tears starting anew. "Your own family." "You stopped being my family in that phone call," I replied, my voice devoid of the emotion I thought I would feel. There was no anger, only a vast, weary sadness. "When you called me a weight. When you calculated the best way to manipulate me out of my home. When you laughed about my weakness. You misunderstood," my father blustered, his go-to defense. "It was just talk. We were stressed." "I don't think I did." I pulled out my new phone and placed it on the table. "I still have the recording, if you'd like a reminder of exactly what you said." My mother flinched. My father's face hardened. "So this is it? You throw us out, throw away our entire relationship, over one conversation." "This isn't about one conversation," I said, finally giving voice to the truth I had only just learned to articulate. "This is about a lifetime of feeling like I was an investment you were waiting to cash in. The house was just the final straw. It was the moment I realized that you didn't love me, you loved what I could provide for you." I looked from my mother's crumpled face to my father's stony one. They didn't understand. Or perhaps they didn't want to. "What do you want from us?" my father asked, his voice rough. It was the question I had been asking myself for months. What did I want? An apology? It would be meaningless. Penance? They were incapable of it. "I want you to leave me alone," I said, the simple words landing with the weight of a final verdict. "I want you to take the things from the storage unit and build your own life, with your own resources. I want to be free of the obligation to make you happy." My mother let out a sob. "But we're your parents." "I know," I said. And that was the tragedy of it all. I stood up. "I hope you find what you're looking for." "I truly do. But you won't find it with me." I turned and walked toward the elevators, not looking back. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a surgeon who had just completed a painful but necessary amputation. The limb was gone, and I would carry the scar forever, but the disease had been stopped. I was going to live. The year that followed was one of quiet, intentional reconstruction. I poured my energy into my work, earning a promotion to junior partner. I excelled at designing spaces that felt safe, functional, and full of light, everything I had craved for myself. My reputation grew, not just for my designs, but for the way I worked with clients, for my fierce advocacy of their vision against the pressures of budgets and contractors. The work I was doing with Dr. Sharma was harder. It involved revisiting the foundations of my childhood, examining the hairline cracks of neglect and emotional manipulation that had been there from the beginning. It was painful, but with each session, I felt myself growing stronger, my own internal structure becoming more sound. Inspired by my journey, I started a small, pro bono side project. I developed a workshop for young women on financial literacy and boundary setting, which I called Designing Your Own Foundation. I ran it out of a local community center on Saturdays. I taught them about reading contracts, about recognizing emotional manipulation in financial discussions, about the power of the word no. I shared parts of my own story, reframed as a case study in self-advocacy. The response was overwhelming. My pain was being alchemized into purpose. One afternoon, I received an email from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. She had heard about my workshop through a friend. "I know we haven't spoken," she wrote, "but I wanted to tell you that I think you are an incredibly brave woman. Your mother and Thomas, they have always been this way. I'm so sorry you were the one who had to bear the brunt of it for so long." We met for coffee the following week. She filled in the missing pieces of the blueprint, telling me stories about my parents' early life, their shared sense of victimhood, their pattern of leaning on others and then resenting them for it. Her validation was not a vindication, but a comfort. I was not crazy. I had not overreacted. On the second anniversary of the day I sold the house, I took a solo trip back to Port Blossom. I didn't drive down Lilac Lane. The house belonged to another family now, and I hoped they were filling it with light. Instead, I went to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the bay, where my grandmother was buried. I laid a bouquet of hydrangeas on her grave and sat in the grass, the familiar sea breeze on my face. "Hi, Grandma," I whispered. "I think I finally figured it out. The house was never the sanctuary. You were." The lesson wasn't about property, it was about self-worth. I had to lose the house to build a real home, a home inside myself. A sense of profound peace settled over me. I had no idea if I would ever speak to my parents again. The door was not barred, but I was no longer standing beside it, waiting. Forgiveness, I was learning, was not about absolving them. It was about releasing myself from the hope that they would ever be different. My chosen family was now a collection of dear friends, colleagues who respected me, and the community of women I was helping to empower. My life was my own design, built on a foundation of self-respect, with strong walls and windows wide open to the sun. The weight was gone. And in its place, there was light. So much light.